The Four Treasures That Cannot Return, A Tale of Relaxation. In a valley where cypress trees whispered to the wind, there lived an old craftsman named Borna. His workshop stood at the edge of a garden where pomegranate blossoms fell like snow in spring. For 40 years, he had carved wood into objects of beauty, and in that time, he had also carved wisdom into the hearts of those who came to learn from him. One morning, as golden light filtered through the latticed windows, Borna's young apprentice, Kousha, rushed in with excitement bubbling on his lips. "Master, I must tell you something about the merchant's daughter. I saw her speaking with the baker's son, and I think she—" But Borna raised a gentle hand, and in that moment, Kousha remembered the 4 things his master had taught him, the 4 treasures that, once released, can never be gathered again. The spoken word, like a bird freed from its cage, it flies where it will. Once your tongue releases it into the air, no hand can catch it and bring it home. The loosed arrow, once the bowstring sings and the shaft takes flight, not even the archer who sent it forth can call it back. The passing moment, each breath of life, precious as morning dew, evaporates in the sun of time. Yesterday cannot be relived, the wasted hour cannot be reclaimed. The decree of fate, what has been written cannot be unwritten, and those who accept what comes find peace instead of struggle. Kousha paused, his words still unspoken, hovering like butterflies at the threshold of his mouth. He looked at his master's patient eyes and felt a question forming within him. "Master," he said softly, "I almost spoke without thinking. But now I wonder, if words cannot be taken back, how do I know which ones to release?" Borna set down the piece of cedar he had been smoothing and gestured for Kousha to sit beside him. The morning light painted patterns across the workshop floor, and in the quiet that followed, Borna began to speak. "Many years ago, when I was young like you, I worked in the workshop of Master Dariush. One day, I saw him making what I thought was a mistake in his measurement. Eager to prove myself clever, I announced loudly before all the other apprentices, 'Master, you have cut it wrong.' The workshop fell silent. Master Dariush looked at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, not anger, but a deep sadness. He said nothing, only smiled gently and continued his work. Later, when the piece was assembled, I realized he had been correct all along. The shame I felt was like hot coals in my chest." Borna's voice softened with the memory. "But here is the true lesson, Kousha. Master Dariush never spoke of my error to anyone. When I came to apologize, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said, 'Young Borna, I see you have learned something today. That is more valuable than being right.' He helped me save my dignity before the others, speaking of my keen observation rather than my foolish mistake. From that day, I understood, we cannot put spilled water back into the cup. But we can choose. Do we wish to be happy, or do we wish to be right? Master Dariush chose my happiness over his own pride, and in doing so, he gave me a gift that lasted a lifetime." Kousha listened intently, and Borna continued, his hands moving gently as he spoke, as if shaping the air itself. "Before you speak of the merchant's daughter, ask yourself, how will my words be received? Will they build trust or break it? Will they help or harm? Remember, when we speak, others interpret not just our words, but our tone, our intention, our very spirit. A word spoken harshly can wound deeper than any blade, while the same truth spoken with kindness can heal." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting intricate patterns through the carved screens, footsteps approached the workshop entrance. It was old Parisa, a widow from the village, carrying a broken chair. Her face was lined with worry and apology. "Master Borna," she said hesitantly, "I know you are busy, but my chair, It was my husband's favorite, and— Say no more, Borna smiled warmly, rising to greet her. Kousha and I will repair it today. Please, sit in the garden and rest. There is fresh water from the spring and dates from yesterday's market. After Parisa settled among the pomegranate trees, Kousha whispered, Master, we have the merchant's order to complete. Can we afford the time? Borna examined the broken chair, running his fingers along the crack with the same care he might show a wounded bird. Kousha, let me ask you something. When I am gone from this world, what will remain? The young man looked around the workshop, at the beautiful carvings, the tools worn smooth by decades of use, the finished pieces waiting for their owners. Your work, master. Your beautiful creations. Perhaps, Borna nodded, turning the chair in his hands. But these things will eventually decay, be burned, or be forgotten. What truly remains are the memories we leave in people's hearts. Every moment we live, we are weaving a thread into the great tapestry of existence. We can choose golden threads or gray ones. We can add beauty or leave holes. He held up the broken chair, its wood scarred by years of use. This repair will take perhaps an hour. But for old Parisa, whose husband carved this chair before he died, this hour will give her years of comfort. She will remember that when she needed help, someone cared. That memory, that kindness, becomes part of her story, and perhaps she will pass that kindness to another. Kousha felt something shift in his understanding. So every moment is an opportunity? Every single moment, Borna confirmed, already beginning to work on the chair's broken joint. An opportunity to be thankful, to support someone, to bring a smile to a face creased with worry, to do good without expecting reward, to teach, to build trust, to strengthen friendship. Each moment is a seed, Kousha, and we are gardeners who choose what we plant. They worked together in companionable silence, and as they did, Borna showed Kousha a new technique for reinforcing the joint, how to angle the grain just so, how to let the wood itself guide the repair. See, Borna said, his weathered hands guiding Kousha's younger ones. Even now, this moment, I teach you something new. You learn something valuable. The moment passes, yes, but what we built in it remains. This knowledge will stay with you long after this day has faded into memory. When the chair was finished, stronger than it had been before, they brought it to old Parisa in the garden. The joy that lit her face was like sunrise breaking through clouds, and Kousha understood then that his master was right. Some things remain long after wood and stone have crumbled. That afternoon, Borna sent Kousha to the village square to deliver a finished table. As the young apprentice walked through the bustling marketplace, carrying his burden carefully through the crowded pathways, he saw something that troubled him. Two merchants were arguing loudly over space for their stalls, their voices rising above the general din of commerce. The crowd was growing, tempers flaring like dry kindling catching spark. One merchant, red-faced and gesturing wildly, shouted, "You always take more than your share. You're selfish and greedy." The other merchant's face hardened with anger and resentment, his fists clenching at his sides. The situation was spiraling toward violence, and Kousha could see other merchants and customers beginning to take sides, the tension spreading through the square like ripples in a disturbed pond. Kousha remembered his master's words, his lessons about spilled water and loosed arrows, and his heart began to pound. He set down the table carefully and stepped forward, though his voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Friends, I see two skilled merchants who both wish to serve the growing number of people in our village. Our village has indeed grown. There are more families now than ever before. Perhaps this is a moment to think together about how we might arrange the square so everyone has what they need." The first merchant turned to him, still angry, his face flushed. "Easy for you to say. You're just a boy." But Kousha didn't take offense. Instead he smiled, remembering how Master Dariush had allowed his master to save face all those years ago. "You're right that I'm young and have much to learn. That's why I'm curious. You've both been here much longer than I have. You must have seen the village grow. How did merchants solve such problems in the past?" By asking rather than telling, by acknowledging rather than accusing, Kousha had given both men a way to step back from their anger without losing face. The second merchant, feeling heard rather than attacked, stroked his beard thoughtfully, his breathing beginning to slow. "Well," he said after a moment, his voice no longer sharp with fury, "in my father's time, when the cloth merchants had a similar dispute, they agreed to rotate positions each month. Within minutes, the two men were discussing solutions instead of shouting accusations, their heads bent together over a sketch one of them was drawing in the dust. Other merchants gathered around, offering suggestions, and what had been the seed of violence became instead a conversation about cooperation. Kousha picked up his table and continued on his way, his heart full of wonder at how carefully chosen words, spoken with thought for the other person's dignity, could transform conflict into community. When Kousha returned to the workshop, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. He found Borna in the garden, watering the pomegranate trees with a clay pitcher, moving slowly from tree to tree with the patience of one who understands that growth cannot be hurried. "Master," Kousha said, excitement lighting his face, "something remarkable happened today." He told Borna about the merchants in the square, about how he had remembered the lessons of words and dignity, about how anger had transformed into cooperation. Borna listened, nodding slowly, then gestured for Kousha to sit beside him beneath the trees. The evening air was growing cool, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening sky. "You have learned a vital truth today, my student. As our village grows, as more people share this earth together, we must learn the art of living in harmony. Resources become more precious: space, water, wood for our craft. We cannot simply take, we must learn to share." He poured water carefully around the roots of a young tree, his movements deliberate and measured. "See how I water this tree. I do not flood it, drowning its roots. I do not neglect it, letting it wither. I give what is needed." This is how we must think about our world now. How do we share what we have so that all may flourish? How do we bring peace and tranquility rather than conflict and scarcity? The earth grows more crowded with each passing year, and we must grow wiser in how we live together upon it. "But Master," Kousha asked, settling onto the ground beside him, "how do we convince others to think this way?" "Ah," Borna smiled, setting down the pitcher and picking up a fallen pomegranate blossom, holding it gently in his palm as if it were made of moonlight. "Here is where your lesson from the square becomes so important. We cannot force people to change through harsh words or accusations. We cannot make them feel small or wrong. Instead, we must begin with a friendly manner, as you did today. We must speak indirectly of faults, allowing others to discover wisdom themselves, as you allowed those merchants to remember their own father's solutions. We must always think of the other person, ensuring they can save face, maintain dignity." The blossom in his hand caught the last rays of sunlight. "When you spoke to those merchants, you didn't say, 'You are both wrong,' or 'You are both acting like children.' Instead, you acknowledged their experience, asked for their wisdom, and gave them a path to resolution that made them both feel respected. This is the art of words, Kousha, not to wound, but to guide. Not to prove ourselves right, but to help everyone find their way to happiness. For what does it profit us to be right if we create enemies? What good is our correctness if it leaves bitterness in its wake? As darkness began to fall and the crickets began their evening song, Borna brought out a simple clay cup filled with water and placed it on the workbench. The workshop was growing dim, and he lit a small oil lamp that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Before we end this day of lessons, I want you to understand something deeply, Kousha. Watch carefully. He tipped the cup, spilling the water across the wooden surface. It flowed in rivulets, catching the lamplight, dripping to the floor, seeping into cracks, beginning already to evaporate in the warm evening air. "Now," Borna said quietly, "put it back in the cup." Kousha stared at the spilled water, now spread across the bench in a dozen different directions, some already absorbed by the thirsty wood, some already gone into air. He reached out his hand, helpless, knowing before he tried that it was impossible. "I cannot, master. It's impossible." "Exactly." Borna's voice was soft but firm, weighted with all the years of his experience. "This is why we must check and double-check before we act. This is why we must pause before we speak. This is why we must think before we release the arrow. Once the water is spilled, no amount of regret can gather it again. No amount of wishing can return it to the cup. It is gone, scattered, absorbed, transformed, and we must live with the consequences of having spilled it." He took Kousha's hands in his own weathered ones, hands marked by decades of careful work, of splinters and calluses and the gentle strength that comes from a lifetime of creation. "Life is so precious, my student. Every moment of it, every single breath, is a chance to build a better self. Not a perfect self, for perfection is not the goal of any life truly lived. But a self that is wiser today than yesterday. A self that leaves good memories rather than regrets. A self that plants gardens rather than scatters stones." In the lamplight, Borna's face was gentle, full of the love a father might show a son. "So you see, the 4 treasures that cannot return are not just warnings, they are invitations to live consciously, to live with awareness and care." He released Kousha's hands and held up one finger. "The spoken word cannot return, so choose words that build rather than destroy. Speak with kindness. Consider how your words will be received. Think not just of what you say, but how you say it, so that people do not build resentment but become receptive instead. Give others the gift of dignity, as Master Dariush once gave to me. Begin with a friendly manner and speak indirectly of faults, allowing people to save face and find their own way to wisdom." A second finger rose beside the first. "The loosed arrow cannot return, so aim carefully before you act. Think of consequences. Ask yourself, does this action create happiness or merely prove I am right? Choose happiness, Kousha. Choose peace. For at the end of our days, no one remembers who was right in petty arguments, but everyone remembers who brought joy and who brought sorrow." A third finger joined the others. "The passing moment cannot return, so cherish each one as the treasure it truly is. Use this moment to be grateful, to support someone, to smile, to teach, to learn, to build trust, to strengthen bonds. Do not waste these precious seconds on resentment or pettiness or idle gossip. Every moment is an opportunity to create a good memory, to weave a golden thread into the tapestry of your legacy. What we leave behind in the hearts of others, this is what lives on when our bodies return to dust." A fourth finger completed the teaching. "The decree of fate cannot return, so accept what comes with grace. When things do not go as planned, do not waste your energy in bitter struggle against what has already been written. Find peace in acceptance, and use that peace to respond with wisdom rather than anger. This does not mean we become passive, but rather that we work with the currents of life rather than exhausting ourselves swimming against them. Kousha felt tears welling in his eyes, moved by the beauty and weight of these truths, by the accumulation of the day's lessons, by the love in his master's teaching. The workshop seemed to hold its breath around them, the tools on the walls bearing silent witness to this moment of transmission, when wisdom passed from one generation to the next like a flame carefully transferred from lamp to lamp. "Master," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "what about the merchant's daughter?" "What I was going to say this morning." "What were you going to say, Kousha?" The young man paused, thinking carefully, seeing now how different this moment was from the one that had begun the day. "I was going to tell you that I saw her speaking with the baker's son, and I thought she was being deceitful because she is betrothed to the cloth merchant. But now I wonder. I did not hear their conversation. I do not know their hearts. Perhaps they are cousins. Perhaps she was ordering bread for her wedding feast. Perhaps 100 innocent explanations exist that never crossed my mind." He looked down at his hands, seeing them as if for the first time. "If I had spoken, I might have spread a rumor that could hurt her reputation, damage the baker's son's standing, break the cloth merchant's heart, and all of it might have been based on a misunderstanding, on my own quick judgment, on my desire to share an interesting story without thinking of the consequences. And now?" Borna asked gently, though the pride in his eyes was clear. "Now I realize it was not my story to tell." The words would have flown like arrows into the hearts of others, causing wounds I could never heal. The moment of gossip would have passed, giving me a brief feeling of importance perhaps, but the damage would have remained, spreading like spilled water, seeping into places I could never reach, impossible to gather back. I almost destroyed something precious for the sake of a moment's excitement. He met his master's eyes. "I understand now why you raised your hand to stop me. You saved me from carrying that regret for the rest of my life." Borna embraced his apprentice, and in that embrace was all the warmth of pride and love and hope for the future. "You have learned in one day what takes some people a lifetime. You have learned to pause, to think, to choose, to build rather than destroy. This is the beginning of true wisdom." They stood together in the darkening workshop, and around them were the fruits of their labor, the repaired chair for old Parisa that would carry memories of love, the table for the merchant that represented honest work, new pieces in progress that would bring beauty into the world, and tools carefully cleaned and hung for the next day's creating. Everything spoke of care, of attention, of moments well spent. "Everything we create here will eventually turn to dust," Borna said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "The wood will rot, the joints will loosen, the pieces will break or burn or be lost to time. But the kindness we showed old Parisa, that lives on in how she treats others. The skill you learn today, that will pass to your students someday, and to their students after them. The peace you brought to the merchants in the square, that ripples outward, changing how they see conflict, how they teach their children to solve problems. The wisdom you gained about words and their power, these things ripple outward like water from a stone dropped in a pond. They touch other lives, who touch still others, and on across time in ways we cannot see but which are more real than any wooden table." He placed his hand on Kousha's shoulder, and in the gesture was the weight of all the masters who had done the same before him, a chain of teaching stretching back through generations. "You asked me this morning what remains when we are gone. Now you know. We remain in every person we helped, in every kindness we showed, in every student we taught, in every moment we chose to build something good. We remain in the memories of love and support we created. We remain in the world made slightly more beautiful, slightly more peaceful, slightly more kind because we passed through it. This is the only immortality that truly matters." Kousha looked up through the workshop door at the stars, now brilliant in the black velvet of night, understanding now why each moment was so precious. Life was not an endless river but a cup that would one day be empty. How he filled it, what he poured from it, what memories he left behind, these were the only things that truly mattered. The thought was both sobering and exhilarating, like standing on the edge of something vast and beautiful. "Master," he said, his voice steady now, certain, "I want to live so that when my time comes, people will remember me as someone who brought more light than shadow, more peace than conflict, more joy than sorrow. I want to leave behind a legacy of moments well spent, of words carefully chosen, of actions thoughtfully taken." "Then you have already begun," Borna replied, and in his smile was the satisfaction of a teacher who knows his student has truly understood. "For you have learned the great secret, that every single moment, this one and this one and this one, is an opportunity to become who you wish to be, to create the legacy you wish to leave, to build a better self, not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through the accumulation of small choices, moment by moment, day by day. A kind word here, a thoughtful pause there, a helping hand extended, a judgment withheld, a smile given freely. These are the building blocks of a life well lived." The garden grew quiet around them, wrapped in the velvet peace of evening. The pomegranate trees stood in silent witness, their blossoms falling softly in the darkness, each one beautiful in its brief descent, never returning to the branch, but leaving behind the promise of fruit to come. In the distance, a nightingale began to sing, its voice pure and clear in the stillness. In the workshop, two souls had learned again the ancient truth, that life itself is the seal we place upon the lips of eternity, and every moment lived with awareness, kindness, and wisdom is a moment that, though it passes, leaves something beautiful behind. That we cannot take back our words or our actions, cannot relive our wasted hours, cannot change what fate has written, but we can choose, right now, in this very moment, to be conscious, to be kind, to be wise. We can choose what memories we create, what legacy we leave, what threads we weave into the great tapestry of existence. And in making that choice, moment by moment, we become the authors of our own story, the architects of our own legacy, the gardeners of our own souls. Guard your moments as a jeweler guards his gems, for though they pass, what you make of them remains in the invisible treasury of all that has ever been. Speak with kindness, act with thought, live with gratitude, and build a legacy of light that will shine long after you have gone. From the teachings of Master Borna, as remembered by his apprentice Kousha, who one day became a master craftsman himself, and who taught these same lessons to his own students, ensuring that the wisdom of the four treasures would never be lost, passing like water from cup to cup, never diminishing, always flowing forward into the future.